ask a question? What's been the toughest country for Hope to work in? If you feel like you can share that.
Yeah, I mean, we've had to close down in Russia due to the political pressure there. That's one way of looking at toughness. The other place where we've closed an office is in Haiti, and that really is around the prevalence of charity, and it's been really difficult to work there. So those are probably different types of tough. In one case, charity is a huge barrier. We're trying to ask people to save money, to work hard, to invest in their dreams, and we're battling with the sort of international aid industry. In Russia, it was like the social political forces. And then in China, there's a different sort of toughness where we just, at every turn, get a lot of pressure from the government around our religious identity. Yeah.
Really appreciated your comments yesterday about students that you talk to, and they have a very particular idea of what it means to have calling, or God calling on their life, and then to utilize those skills within ministry. And I was wondering if you might talk for a moment about maybe misconceptions that you see with students today about using their skills for God's glory, and what might be a more faithful, orthodox way of thinking about that.
Yeah, I think part of it is for pastors and Christian leaders to begin thinking about. I mean, I think that the big point I made yesterday was that there's this perception that only certain majors and certain types of work have an impact on poverty. And the reality is that they all do. And there's an impact that we experience from business people, from musicians, from people working in manual labor. Like that all contributes toward alleviating the pressures of poverty in our world. And so I think one of the things we have to do, like events like this, I love. Over the course of a couple days, you're going to be featuring business people, having business leaders that are speaking and presenting, in addition to people like me that work for a nonprofit Christian organization. And I think it's something that's extraordinarily rare. I've been to a lot of mission conferences, a lot of conferences on poverty and justice by the nature of my job. And I'll be honest with you, I mean, it's exclusively nonprofit people that are up speaking. It's nonprofit leaders and pastors that are speaking. And so that subtly communicates, and I always look at the justice conferences, I always look at their speaker roles, and it's always people like me, Christian, nonprofit employees who are the kind of lifted up. I think of my friend Rick, who has a medical device company in Denver. And I remember talking to him one time, and he said, yeah, I really am feeling like called. I need to start like helping people more and supporting people and giving back charitably. And I was like, I agree. Those are all really good things to do. I was like, say more about that and tell me about your business. And we were talking. As it turns out, he had just opened up so he has 150 employees in Denver and just opened up a business in Vietnam, a manufacturing facility there. It had 100 employees there. And as he was talking to me about it, he was like, yeah, it's been really interesting. He's like, we located in this area where there are a lot of women that were formerly in sex trafficking that have now come to our business and have started working there. And so like now they're getting paid really well and they're working in this business, and it was just kind of going on. And then he's like, but we're really excited we're going to partner with an orphanage locally and start giving our profits, to that orphanage, which is great. But my challenge to him was like, Rick, like you're in and through what you're doing. You're having an incredible influence in the world. Like, I just have to put a mirror up to him and say, 100 people are now getting to experience a dignifying job, able to use their gifts and abilities. They're not living in the soul-crushing reality of being a prostitute because of the work you're doing. That's not charitable. That's like, I mean, it is charitable, but it's in and through his business. So I think for Christians at all ages, we need to start thinking about conferences, thinking about who we're elevating, what examples and what stories we're telling when we share, so that we're not just lifting up one sort of worker as someone that's doing good work in the world. So that was, I think, a really good starting point to thinking through that. And then I think when we do self-analysis, to really do the assessments, talk to friends and family, and just ask the question, like, what am I good at? And what am I really passionate about? We live in a day and age when that sort of choice is an option for many of us. It hasn't always been the case that people are able to choose and go into an area of work, but it is the case now that we can. So as we can, if you're an accountant and God's wired you that way, pursue that. Don't go be a social worker because you feel like that's a better way to serve the poor.
Thank you very much, Chris. Two questions, one from your presentation yesterday and this morning in chapel. That was yesterday when we did a reflection on gleaning. I was reflecting and I wanted to ask you, in your work and study, do you see the Old Testament really providing an avenue through which people who are poor in the community will actually come out of their poverty, or it was a system of just provide these cleaning opportunities for the poor in your needs, so that every year in, year out, they always come back with me, or they can every day don't do me. That's the first question. The second question, concerning the presentation on hospitality, what about, I don't know what you would talk about the risk of hospitality, especially living in some context where you will hear people who have truly offered hospitality, but the family has been hurt as a result of that. And maybe as a result of that, people hear testimonies of people who have truly and genuinely offered hospitality, but the whole family was hurt. And the process of that,
Yeah.
what did you say?
Yeah, boy, is that a delicate and difficult question. I'll start with that one. I absolutely understand the tension that exists whenever we're opening ourselves up to travelers, to people that we don't know, to visitors. We are taking on some level of risk, and I think as Christians we are called to take risks. We're also called to be wise and to be, so I think that paradox we see Jesus calling us toward the gentleness of doves and the shrewdness of serpents is really important. And, frankly, there are people in my neighborhood who I've seen, and we live in a neighborhood where there's a lot of crime. And there are people in our neighborhood that Allie and I, my wife and I have talked about. It's like, I know just based on seeing the way they've interacted with people that they're not safe. Like, I don't want our kids, by themselves at that house. And so we have to be shrewd as serpents in the day and age that we live in. So I think broadly when thinking about true strangers, there is some level of risk we need to take. We need to expose ourselves to risk, and we need to be careful. That said, I also think that there's more of the metaphorical strangers and the metaphorical travelers, which I was speaking about this morning. There are some literal times where there are travelers coming through town, or homeless people that need a place to stay, and we should open our doors. But there are a lot of people that are searching for meaning, that are lost in our age, that are confused, and they've reached the end of themselves. And we don't need to have all the answers. The call of the Christians is just to invite them in, to experience the love of Jesus, and invite them into our homes. And I think, my wife has done this way better than I have, but she worked as a public school teacher and was the only Christian that taught at her school. And she would regularly invite over her friends who are teachers, successful, professional, very accomplished women, and the community she was in, they're mostly single women, and she would invite them over to our home for dinner, and we'd pray and have dinner and feed them, and just have our kids running around, and kind of got to experience in Denver, experience something that for them, Allie always said, she's like, they look at me like I'm a child bride because she's, 30 years old and she has 2 young kids. And it's just really foreign. I mean, it's really foreign in our culture that, not that we've I've reached this utopia, but just inviting them into our lives and just asking them questions and caring for them. It's just something that's really unique from what they experience in the other communities they're involved in. So I think that there's an opportunity for us to invite in those sorts of travelers where, these are people that can pay their bills and, are doing fine, but they're really searching and they're wondering where they can find meaning in this world. Your first question was around gleaning. Is it a way to provide for people for the short term, or is it a way to really help people grow long term? Is that the kind of the nature of the question? I think it's both. I think gleaning practically in Scripture, when you read about it, was a way of providing for a lot of people who were looking to get back on their feet. When you read about gleaning in the Old Testament, the widows and the immigrants, the orphans, the sojourners, oftentimes it was for a period of time. And then we hold that in contrast with Paul's words in where if you should not work, you should not eat. So it was a way for God's people to allow them to work so that they could eat and provide for themselves. But there's also a call to say, when we read especially Apostle Paul, when he says, I want to come to you and I want to work so that I wouldn't be a burden on you. And so I want to be able to provide for myself and not just be at your mercy all the time. And so I think we, as Christians, we should love people well, but also we need to invite them into experiencing the dignity of not just provide. We should be challenging them to be creating gleaning opportunities for others. So that's where I think that's where the long term comes in. Where yes, we should invite them in to experience the dignity of work, give them an opportunity to use their abilities. But then also, as we do, invite them to say, I believe God's called you to do the same. And the story I shared of Reina this morning, that's what I love so much about her. Here's this woman that's blind, the Dominican Republic, single woman. She was like at the end of her rope and was just ready to give up. And then became a Christian, became a leader in her church, and even despite her blindness, was able to start this really successful business. And now she didn't even see herself as poor anymore. She saw herself as a philanthropist, and when we were in the middle of our meeting with her and she was sharing her testimony with us, she took a phone call in the middle of the meeting, and so it sort of felt rude, like have these guests in her home and she took a phone call, but then we're getting it translated, or she translated, I guess not the actual phone call, but after she finished the call, she shared with us, like, I'm so sorry to take that call, but I'm a deacon in my church, and one of the young girls in my church is going to the hospital right now because she's pregnant, about to have her baby, and she wanted to pray with me before she went into the hospital to deliver this baby. So Reina had just taken on this role of a leader, of an encourager, of a servant in her community, and I think that's the call for us, is to help people to realize the beauty of being a provider and providing gleaning opportunities for people in their midst, even those that on the surface might seem like they have the deck stacked against them. Those are 2 long answers, so hopefully I got them okay.
Just as a response to that, how do you cast the vision of dignity to people who don't have a vision of dignity, who don't have a desire of dignity? So people who have received locally, people who have received, and I'm not speaking politically, I'm speaking from personal experience, who have received welfare for so long, there's a mindset that welfare is the end-all be-all of my source of income. So they don't know the dignity and they don't have a mental history of desiring to work for oneself and desiring to be a leader and desiring to contribute. How do you cast a vision where they don't have one? Or how do you recall the vision that's already inside of them that they've put to sleep?
Yeah, I think the latter is true. I think everyone in their quiet moments wants to be able to provide for themselves, wants to be able to provide for their families. There's this great vignette in one of Bob Lupton's books where he talks about a lot of the Christmas gift programs we do, where we get all of our friends together, or our church, and we get Christmas gifts, and then we go and we find the poorest people in the community and we go give them gifts. I remember doing it myself in high school. Me and a couple of my high school friends, really, upper middle class kids that leave our high school. We went down to the the inner city, and this mom greets us at the door, and we give all these gifts to her that she's going to then give to her kids on Christmas, and her kids are just sitting there in the room as we're doing this. And I just imagine, what would it have felt like for me now being a dad to go to the door. I love my kids so much. I want to give them a great Christmas, so I'm going to humiliate myself to come and at the door receive these young stupid kids that are so excited to get our picture with you, because I love my kids. But that's a humiliating, dehumanizing form of charity, for her to have to do that. And Bob Lupton in his book, he talks about that and talks about how dads always disappear as soon as the people show up at the front door. So dads would, he just saw it time and time again that when they would come to the door with all the Christmas gifts for the family, the dads would disappear because it's humiliating. It's just dehumanizing. So I think we have to think well about our charity. We have to think well about, and I believe we have to just know in our hearts that it might not be today, it might not be in a week, it might not be in a year, that someone comes to that point where they're like, I really want to provide, I want to be a donor, I want to be a philanthropist in my community. People face a ton of challenges and obstacles to experiencing that, but I think deep down it's there. We work in some places which it's not even like a historical or generational poverty, but it's a religious and spiritual like oppression that has told them for so long that they're not worthy. Like in India, working with the untouchables, where the religious elite have said, you aren't worthy, your lot is to die poor so that you can have a better chance in your next one. So we've worked in places where it's not just like a little hesitation to it, it's actually, it runs against everything they know to be true to admit that they believe that they're meant for more than suffering and destitution. So it's possible, but it takes a lot of consistency. And our words have to match our actions. The way that we do, the way that we serve and help people, the way that we care for and show hospitality, it has to be dignifying. And it has to be, like we can say that you're created in God's image, but if we're the ones that comes out the hero and you're the one that comes out like the noble recipient, our words don't mean anything because our actions have invalidated what we've said. I think you had a question, Mark.
Well, I was just going to ask, what are the special challenges of working in Roma, working with Roma?
With the Roma, so that, again, this is kind of a derogatory term would be the gypsies, and we work with the Roma people throughout Eastern Europe. And the biggest challenge is that it's such an isolated community, and the power structures are such that there's like the one boss who, can really make it hard for you to work. So in these communities, they have their own sort of government. And I know in the places where we've worked, like some of the Roma communities have invited us in with with warm arms, welcome arms. In some cases, the boss just doesn't want it to happen. And so we've had to really work to build relational capital over time with other people that have influence into that guy's life, because he has all the power in those communities.
I know you mentioned like some of the ways that you've seen like hospitality of benefits and stuff, but do you have any other examples of kind of like how you've seen people like use the hospitality and like welcome strangers in?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you just one personally. Two personal stories. One, my brother-in-law and his family, my brother-in-law and his wife and their family have become foster parents, and they do emergency foster care and long-term foster care. And they just have, it's like, we've got an extra bedroom. There are kids in our city that need a place to stay. Like, I don't understand. It like feels like there's a disconnect there, So they just stepped out, and it's inconvenient and challenging and hard at times, but they took a risk because they just believe like we've got place. Like we have a room, we have a bed. Actually, we have a whole, we've got a whole place for someone that could come and stay with us that needs a home. And in Denver, there's a huge shortage of foster families. They're like tripling and quadrupling the rates for foster parents, like the daily reimbursement rates, just because there aren't enough families. There's such a transient city. A lot of people just move to Denver. They don't have support systems, so when they get in trouble, like they need foster care help. They don't have a lot of family close by. So that's one example. It's just been really beautiful. Again, just to see them inconvenience themselves for the sake of these children, and just the beautiful way in which, it provides an opportunity, sometimes even for a short amount of time, for that child to receive care and to experience the hospitality of that home. And that, one of the things they've said, which I just love, is like the deposits of love we make in that child's life, like they will never come back empty. So it may be a week, it may be a day, it may be a year, but like that will never, like those deposits of love we make into that child and those deposits of hospitality will stay with them forever. And I think that's true. The other example that comes to mind is a very different example, but my older brother has special needs, and the best gift he's ever received was he got a full-time job offer to work at Costco 17 years ago. And Costco, as a company, I think just practices hospitality. They, first of all, they considered my brother. Like as a company, they just have this sort of culture where they would look at someone like my brother who's unable to read, he's unable to drive, he faces all kinds of challenges, and isn't the traditional person, like in terms of a resume, that you would say, yeah, we want someone like Matthew. But Costco has this culture of hospitality where they take risks in how they hire. And so Costco hired Matthew 17 years ago. He actually, they pay him well, treat him well, and then the staff, there's just such a culture of hospitality within the staff. So, the bike shop guys let my brother park his bicycle in their shop, and they always tune up his bike for him for free and just take care of him. He's been invited to birthday parties. He's been invited to kids like baptisms. I mean, he's been invited to so many things by the staff of this Costco. And for someone like Matthew, like it's hard to make friends. It's difficult. Like you can't go places. So like it's just become a real community of hospitality there. And a lot of them aren't believers. It's just the way in which the company operates. So he felt Costco was so hospitable that he actually bought a house, which he has fully paid off, which shares a property line with Costco. So he actually can walk out of his back door and walk right into the front door of Costco. That's how much he loves Costco. So if you're ever in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, his line is always the longest, so I just warn you now, but if you go and ask for Matthew, you'll find him help him to check people out at Costco in Lancaster.
Chris, a lot of the audience here today are college students, and just wonder what advice you would give to them about their pursuit and preparation for meaningful, fulfilling, significant work.
Yeah, one of the organizations we work with is Halftime. Has anybody interacted with Halftime before? Heard of them? Halftime is a group that helps men and women who have reached halftime in their life, they've achieved some level of significance, and they're asking of success, and they're asking questions about significance for the second half of their life. And one of the things that's hard for me about Halftime is it's sad how many people that I meet that are in their 50s who are just beginning to ask that question, like, how has God wired me? And it's just been for so long just kind of the rat race, that they're finally at a place where they have the space to sort of consider, what am I good at? And how could I best serve the world around me? So I think it's important, first of all, just to be willing to ask the question. But one of the strategies they use, which I think is applicable to college students too, they call them low-cost probes. So opportunities that you can get involved with an organization or an industry in a way that's not like quitting your job and moving to Afghanistan, but might be just a lower cost, lower risk experiment to try and learn and to grow. So for a college student, that could be, I often tell people, like, if you really want to work in microfinance, pick the 5 microfinance organizations that you think are the very best, do your research, and then learn as much as you can about the industry. Start donating money to all those organizations, go and volunteer at their events, become a known entity, show up for their gatherings of people, and just become someone that's a student of that. And then eventually there might be an opportunity even to do a volunteer project of some sort, where you can get a little bit more of a probe into it. What I really like working in this field. And I think there's obviously the internship approach, and you can do fellowships with organizations or in industries, but there are a lot of smaller ways that you can really get to know what an organization is like, what an industry is like, without actually quitting your job and moving across the world, or moving from one industry to another. So just become continue to be a real student of the industry that you want to work in, or the organizations you want to work in. Ask to meet with leaders within the organization. I know at Hope, and this is true of a lot of our peers, if there's a student or a recent grad that's saying, I really would love to get into your line of work and would love to do an educational interview with you and just get to know you, and they come prepared with questions, and we can just get on a phone call. And like I do that a lot, and it's a way that a lot of us are really happy to help and to serve, to try and give you a little bit of because every website's really beautiful, right? I mean, that's the challenge. Like, you're looking, like, almost every organization has a great, compelling, visual sort of presence online. And so it's really tough, I know, as a student, to try and figure out, but what's it really like? Like, is it really that glorious, and that amazing all the time, or is it hard? And so I think that's one way to do it. Do you have a question? Just want to say hi? Yeah, go ahead.
I have an example of hospitality. My daughter is married a national Japanese. So they're here in Lexington now. And so they're eating at I think an Indian restaurant. They met another Japanese couple. And so they kind of became friends. And so the company, I guess, or whatever, moved him to Mexico to work. But before they moved, she introduced my daughter to 2 more Japanese ladies. And they talked about going back to Japan to work. And I said, you don't realize you're being a missionary right here. I mean, you're affecting these ladies, and then they're sending them back to Japan or someplace else. And I said, you're having an effect.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think I think back to your question, there should be this overarching impulse for followers of Christ to say, like, if the parable of the Good Samaritan isn't a metaphor, which I don't think it is. Like, I think it's a real story. I mean, I think it's a real challenge. It's not a metaphor for something spiritual. It's like, literally there are people around us that we're walking by all the time who are scared, who are beat up, who are bloodied on the side of the road, and our call and our impulse as Christians should be to be looking for them. And I think that it doesn't matter if you're on a college campus, walking on the streets of Lexington, living in Kinshasa and in Congo, like everywhere, our impulse should be like, where are we looking within? Where are we like so glued to ourselves, glued to our phones? And this is not like, I've not figured this out. This is something I have to grow into. But like, how are we missing the people who are just pleading for help and pleading for a place to come for hospitality because we're so absorbed in ourselves? And I think that's where there's so much life and freedom for us in those places. And we actually find that as we give, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And so there is something that is humanizing about finding someone in a place whose heart and just inviting them in and caring for them. Yeah.
I'd like to share a short illustration of how my wife and I learned how not to give. Decades ago, we helped sponsor a Vietnamese refugee family when we were living in Lexington through our church, Centenary United Methodist. And after a while, I felt the family was uncomfortable with us. And it finally came to light that, as you've said, they were humiliated by the level of help they were getting from our church. And what turned the corner for us was we have a daughter adopted from Vietnam, and they offered to babysit her when I had meetings at Asbury and in the evening or something like that. And that made a tremendous difference. We offered to pay them. Boy, was that a big mistake. They wanted to do it as a way of giving back and having a relationship that wasn't, top down.
That's such a beautiful picture of what we're called to as Christians. I think that's, there's something about an exchange. And that's why, back to entrepreneurship and business, there's something beautiful about charging for a product and someone paying for it, because you're in this unique interdependent relationship with your customers. And that's something that's hard for a lot of charities, frankly, because a lot of charities are just giving things away. And so we don't necessarily hear things, because it's like, if we give a substandard product, well, it was free, so I didn't love it. I didn't use it that long, but it was free, so I'm not going to even provide feedback back to the charity. So there's something really beautiful about the market, which allows people to have this interdependent relationship where there's this loop of feedback that exists. Yelp doesn't exist for charities, right? Yelp is a way for customers to hear back from their from their customers. So businesses are working really hard normally, if they're a good business, to try and earn the respect, the trust, the confidence of their customers, because they know that they're going to hear from them if things don't work well, as they should. And charities, that's become a real area of challenge that we don't have a lot of those feedback loops. And to your point, there's just something much, much more dignifying about that. I have a friend who has Lawrence, who started Magic City Woodworks in downtown Birmingham. And Magic City is, helps guys that are struggling, coming out of prison or homelessness or addictions, gives them an opportunity to come into the workshop, become an employee of his business and make furniture and lots of other wood-made products. And one of the things he was struggling with for a long time is he used to do these fundraising events where he'd bring in a bunch of wealthy donors, and to be really candid, a lot of the donors are white in Birmingham. A lot of the guys he's working with on his staff are African American. And so Lawrence and I were talking, and he was just like, I just used to really struggle because we'd bring in all of our wealthy white-collar donors that are coming into Magic City Woodworks, into this woodworking facility, and then we sit around in tables, and it's like the guys at the shop are getting, the sort of like, they're like a fish in a fishbowl, right? And then the rest of the donors are asking them questions, and it's like high-pressure environment. So one of the ways he did what you just shared, which really has created a lot of beautiful, beautiful outcomes, is he's made the guys the experts, which they are. Like none of these guys, these donors that are coming in, these couples have any idea how to make anything. And so they're coming in and they're letting the guys in the wood shop show them how they use their products, how they, the skills they've developed. And so they become and who doesn't love learning how like a craftsman makes something? It's like a really exciting thing to learn. So it's flipped the tables from them being, interviewed by these folks to just being someone that's teaching them. So there's this great interplay between them. So I think there are little ways that charities and churches, us and our households can do just that, where it's not just providing not just being hospitable, but then also receiving hospitality from the people that we're serving.
We probably have time for one or two more questions.
Yeah.
Some nonprofits have all employees raise support,
Mm-hmm.
like a mission model, like everyone's a
Yeah.
missionary, and then
Right.
others will have support raisers, and then others paid salary.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about the model for Hope?
Yeah, so we have a development team, which that's my responsibility. So if you're looking for a place to give, no. So we have our approach has been somewhat like a lot of nonprofits, like larger nonprofits especially, where we have a development team exclusively focused on raising our annual budget, which this year's $16 million. So our team is focused on doing that. And then no one else that works for Hope has to do direct fundraising. We do say at Hope, everyone's a fundraiser. We have, right now, we're in the middle of our annual thank you note campaign, where our non-development staff members, our accountants, our field staff, our marketing staff are writing handwritten thank you notes to all 4,700 of our donors from last year, and just thanking them for their support and just saying, appreciate the way you've allowed us to do what we do. And we're asking them to invite people to events and to be recruiters in that way. So that's the way we've done things. But we actually, on staff, there are a few people that came to Hope previously having been missionaries that raised support elsewhere. And they wanted to continue to have those relationships with people that are praying for them and supporting them financially. So they've been seconded to us by their missionary agencies. So we've done that a few times, and some of our interns are unpaid. And so we'll have donors they'll have donors that give financially to help cover some of their costs. So in terms of fundraising, I think like anything, there are strengths and there are shadows to every approach. There are strengths and shadows to the approach we use. There are strengths and shadows to the fundraising model approach. Maybe we can talk more afterward and dive in a little bit deeper if that would be of interest to you, but that's what we do.
One more question.
How often do we buzz our heads out for you? Once a week?
Yes.
Yeah, about the same. Yeah, good question. I was just noticing I just love your hairstyle. So.
Well, thanks. You're one of the few.
It's a great look, I have to say.
It's easy.
It's so easy.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys.